All right,
Whoever's there.
it being approximately 6 o'clock. This is a study session, so we're more in a more relaxed mode, so I'm going to slouch. There we go. Yeah, we just kind of, we are recorded, and the microphone picks everything up. We do have Eric Rosane here from the newspaper, so speak very slowly. Get the quotes right. And we haven't heard from Councilmember Blair, but we have heard from Councilmember Carmody. She's experiencing an issue that we wish her well on. And so with no further ado, the only agenda item tonight's study session is to hear about the water reclamation facility, and Steve's going to lead us off.
Thank you. For those that I have not met, my name is Steve Clark. I'm the Interim Public Works Director. And my first comment this evening is I want to tell you all what a real pleasure it is for me to work here in Yelm. I'm just amazed every day of all the cool things you have and all the neat things you guys are working on. But tonight we get to talk about one of the big elephants that are in the room, and that's the Water Reclamation Facility, or the WRF. This evening our team consists of people from parametrics. We've got Brian Bunker over here, we've got Doug Brashauer over here, and Glenn Barkus over here. Kind of go over some of their background here momentarily, but the purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the WRF. We want to give you some information about the background, the challenges, the improvements that have been made thus far and continue to meet, the alternatives that we looked at as a team, and we want to make a recommendation as far as which alternative we think will meet the long-term needs of the city of Yelm in the future and beyond, the horizon being at 2025, but facility that I think will serve you well into the future. So having said that, one of the terms that you're going to hear tonight is called MBR. What MBR stands for is membrane bioreactor. Combination of biological processes. Activated sludge, for example, could be one of the biological processes, combined with a membrane filtration system. It's really the state of the art as far as how to wastewater throughout the cities in North America and Europe. So just wanted to kind of let you know what that terminology is before we go too far down the primrose path on this. But to talk about why did we select parametrics? Because we felt that they were the most qualified of several firms that we interviewed that can, better address the issues that we're currently facing in the city of Yelm. They have good institutional knowledge because they've been working with the city of Yelm for a number of years now, both in terms of the existing facilities as well as the installation of the collection system here in town. And Brian Bunker, for example, has been working with the city of Yelm since 2013. He's been the project manager on the facility plan. He's been our on-call person, that if we have issues at the plant, he's been the person that can point us in the right direction when we need to. And he's been heavily involved in the immediate upgrades that the city just recently completed several years past of the WRF. Doug Brashauer, 37 years of experience, and he's the wastewater technology lead. His experience in a number of communities working on their plants. For example, Parametrics has worked with the lot on Martin Way, the Nisqually water treatment facility, wastewater treatment facilities for Shelton, Duval, Skokomish, Port of Sunnyside, Josie Wallops, and Sun River, to name a few. Glenn Barkus is the senior electrical design and SCADA lead, and he's got 30 years of experience in the SCADA industry as well as 15 years in wastewater. And he's been working with the city of Yelm in 2009. It was the lead engineer on the SCADA upgrade that we did in the past. So, and not to mention, we've got Pat Hughes over here from the Public Works Department. He's been very active in the project manager of facility. So having said this, I want to again thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening to talk about this. It's a lot to take in. So really breaking this up into two parts. We're going to talk about the wastewater facility tonight. Then we're going to talk about how we can pay for it at our next study session on March the 3rd. So this is kind of just take it all in and don't hesitate to, ask questions. We've got a good team here that's got a lot of answers, and so don't be shy in that respect, because the more you know, the better you can work better with the public works department. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Bunker, and he'll run through the presentation on the facility.
Thank you, Steve. Bible here. It's been a couple of years since I've been here. To some of you, I haven't met you, and others again. A lot of the previous presentations that I was involved in to the council were related to the plant and the production of the facility plan that we did in 2016. I'm going to refer first to a lot of the information that was in that and the process that went through, basically just evaluating what you have and the condition of that facility. And then I'm going to hand it to Doug, who's going to take us on a walk through an update that we feel like needs to be done just related to a population forecast and making sure that we're looking to the future far enough out into the future to meet your needs. He's going to talk about an idea that we have to solve problems with regard to the aging facility as well as the growing population that you have. I saw in the Seattle Times just this past weekend that Yelm is the 6th fastest growing community in Washington. And
We slipped.
Yeah. What happened?
weren't you the fastest growing community in Western Washington at one point?
Yeah, for a while there.
Perhaps maybe it's the east side. I didn't see ahead of that, but in any case, that's obviously a challenge that you've got to face coming up. And right now, we think that you've got some real challenges just with regard to the age of this facility that we talk about. So the water reclamation facility, as you may know, was constructed in two pieces. First in 1993, making it 27 years old now. And then the SBR, the sequencing batch reactor, was added in 1999. Yelm carries the moniker of being that first community in the state of Washington to reclaimed water, and I think that's something you should be proud of. And being able to continue to do that is a decision of the council, obviously, but it is, I think, an important aspect to look at. The problems that have been, the city has faced traditionally has been just the process of taking ammonia and turning it into nitrogen gas, which is essentially how we're cleaning the wastewater, and then filtering it. One of the challenges that you have is that the temperature of the wastewater that comes into the facility is a little bit colder than I think was originally anticipated, so that's caused some problems. We have a lack of BOD food that basically the bugs need in order to perform that biological process is low as flows are increasing. You have low pH and high sulfides in your wastewater, which also cause problems. And those problems are a challenge to Bill and his team, as wastewater that's coming in is variable. It's constantly changing. And as these baseline conditions are changing, they have a hard time staying on top of it, the existing process. And so it's constantly requiring modification and adjustment. They're doing that in an environment that's just getting old. As a result of all of this, in the last several years, you have had some challenges actually meeting your permit from the state of Washington Department of Ecology. They send a letter monthly if there are exceedances in permits. We're going to talk about that in a second. I mentioned the aging infrastructure and failing equipment that is throughout this facility because it's old. And right now you're at a point where there really is not much ceiling left for you to grow into. I mentioned the letters from ecology. If those continue, you're at risk. I don't know that this is going to happen, but you're at risk for fines or potential third-party lawsuits, and some type of enforcement actions from ecology, growth restrictions, or basically just the inability to treat wastewater, which I think is the biggest concern here.
I apologize for breaking in.
No, please ask questions if you have questions.
Well, it's not that. Our intercity transit, our information and technology team would like you to stand behind the podium so that you can be picked up properly by the camera and the microphone.
I'm sorry, I wander.
You're welcome.
I'll go backwards.
But since I did interrupt you, it's important for the council to understand the history. Number one, the reason that we have the first treatment plant in the state of Washington to produce Class A water was because of a lawsuit that was filed against the city back then, because we were discharging dirty water into the Nisqually River. The people who brought forward that suit are waiting in the wings to bring it again if at any point we fail in our processes. So it's not if they will, it's when they will, based on what we can accomplish as a city.
What was that suit at the time?
What was it?
Who was the people that sued the city?
His name is Ed Kenny, Kenney. He's a former teacher from the Yelm School District, actually, and a great guy, still active in the Nisqually River Council, lives out up the river, and he had an organization. I don't remember the name of it, but it was something like Water Forever or something. They were very effective in motivating the city of Yelm to reach out, which we then got a federally funded grant to build the facility 27 years ago.
Thank you, Mark.
Good information. So in terms of permit violations, in order to discharge to the river, you have to have a nitrogen limit of 10 milligrams per liter. You can see the red line is the permit limit, and starting in the beginning of that, I'm sorry, I apologize for the small scale. January of 15 is where the graph starts. It goes until June of this past year, June of 19. Those are monthly reports that your staff has to turn into the Department of Ecology every month. So that's exceedances for nitrogen and turbidity, which is particles basically in the wastewater. Ammonia, in order to be a reclaimed water producer, you have an ammonia limit that you can't exceed. Those are your exceedances for ammonia. And coliform. So you can see that even right up until the end of the period there that you're still having issues. Throughout the process, though, we have been working on some things, which I'll explain in a second, to try to manage this process. But when you have an aging plant that is, in some instances, 27, some of the pump stations out there are part of the lagoon plant, 27 years old. We'd love to design things to last 27 years, but they just don't last that long. When you buy a car, you do everything you can to take care of it, but sooner or later, maintenance on it just starts creeping up and you're doing more and more. Yeah.
You mentioned that we were the first to have the reclaimed water in Washington State. Were there any other cities or municipalities right after us within the 5-10 years or so?
So right down the road, Lot produces reclaimed water.
So what do they do when their plant breaks down? And do they have issues, or you know?
They have a much larger facility, so they have a larger staff. They have a different process. Staying on top of it, though, from the standpoint of equipment, is also about having the ability to exchange parts. And you have an old car, sooner or later you reach a point where you just can't find parts for that car. And that's the situation you guys are running into.
So we're unique in the kind of how our plant runs then and operates?
Yes and no. I mean, an SBR is a common process. We do a lot of work for the city of Orting. the boarding also has a batch reactor that they're looking at right now, making major upgrades to as well. It's just at that age where it needs work. And Lot, we're also working for Lot. They're in the middle of a huge plant upgrade as well. Part of that is capacity driven as well as just the age of infrastructure. They're looking, the project that we're helping them with is an energy project as well. And that they're looking at more efficient pumps, cheaper way to move liquid around in the plant. And that's typically what happens when you get to 20, 25, 30 years old.
Fair enough, thank you.
So as I mentioned, maintenance, repairs, no spare parts. Or you end up with temporary equipment that really isn't supposed to be there, but you're just needing it as a workaround to keep power to things. You have blowers there that were part of the, those are the original blowers that have I believe a 15-year expectancy, and we're at 21, 22 years with those. The pump station on the top left was part of the lagoon system that's 27 years old, and again, you've got situations where valves on these systems are starting to snap. We've got valves that won't close all the way. There's 6 big valves that are part of the SBR process, 3 on the front side and 3 on the back side of the 3 big basins that you have that hold wastewater. They're not closing properly now. They won't seat all the way. On the back side of that, when you can't close a valve all the way and you're supposed to be containing the wastewater so that you can treat it, and untreated wastewater is escaping, that's partially why we're seeing turbidity and coliform exceedances, because you've got untreated wastewater that's just slipping through. Those valves are expensive to fix because they're big.
The valves on there, are those butterfly valves that are on the outside?
Those are pneumatic butterfly valves.
Okay. Is there a reason we're using? Yeah, I saw that they were butterfly valves. I've seen them. I was trying to ask you. Is there a reason we're using butterfly valves instead of something like a gate valve?
Well, plug valve is really what you probably should be using.
Yeah, that's why I was. So when I went there and checked out the site, they said it was recommended to use butterfly valves originally, but I know when we're cutting water, you don't want to use a butterfly valve because they don't seat.
They were cheaper.
Okay.
It's just, it was inexpensive at the time, and
But now it's becoming.
they're not inexpensive, but it was more inexpensive than a plug valve would cost.
Thank you.
We looked in that instance, just as we're troubleshooting and looking at options to fix that, we go from pneumatic to electric. Then we found ourselves in a situation where we're trying to evaluate, well, if power goes out and we need these valves to be open or close, what's the normal position that they're going to go to? And we need backup power just to do that. All things that you tend looking at a wastewater plant. There are electrical issues out there as well. Variable frequency drives are what help these motors to start and stop. Start up in an efficient way so that you're not burning them out, so that you don't have a motor that's just coming into full speed right away. They last longer if you can control how they start, and they're more efficient if you can adjust the power that goes to a pump or a motor when you don't need full power. But you've got variable frequency drives out there that are past their ended life cycle that are failing and causing pump failures, blower failures. Your generators are past their service life. You've got meters in the system that you can't remove or replace because the flanges are rusted together, or the meters are actually inaccurate. Well, I think we have a pretty good handle on what's flowing through that plant, but some of the metering is not correct. Like I mentioned, we've worked hard to try to work with staff to come up with different ways to keep the plant going to meet permit. We went from 2-basin operation to 3-basin mode. I think you've heard about that. We assisted with seasonal improvements. When it's colder in the winter, it's harder to complete the process. And we looked at options associated with perhaps denitrifying using the filters in addition to the SBR basins. We've messed around with pH and magnesium hydroxide to help improve settleability. Chemical feed pumps have been replaced, and that's helping. They did a major filter maintenance a couple of years ago. It was hard to do, but that has helped a little bit. As part of this last project, we did upgrade the reclaimed water pump station. That was a facility that was literally ready to fall into foreign contact basin, and that is working well. We've provided improved controls to Bill and Jeremy and the staff so that they can modify the SBRs and have a process that they can customize. That system was one that was basically a black box when you bought it. It worked magically, turned blowers on and off when the algorithm inside it told it to, but now staff has the ability to do that. Again, they're still having challenges to properly treat wastewater.
I'm going to talk a little bit about plant capacity.
Maybe before you start, just
Sure.
since it's flowing wise.
Yeah.
Any questions about just the existing facility?
The current design capacity of the plant is 0.83 MGD, 130,000 gallons a day. And one of the things that the state requires is that start making improvements. You're at 85% capacity, or that would be at 0.71 MGD. Okay. Flows right now are 0.55, but based on the flow projections that we've done, based on the population projections, the flow is expected to be at that 0.71 5 years. 5 years will be here before you know it. So the plant is running out of capacity. So in addition to age, you're also running out of capacity. And the closer you run up against that capacity, the harder it's going to be to meet permit. Okay, along with some of the other issues that Brian talked about earlier. So the improvement goals, there are several things. We expanded the planning horizon to a full 25 years, out to 2045. We want to replace aging infrastructure, improve energy efficiency. And like you saw those blowers, they make blowers now that are 40% more efficient than what you have, really reducing the amount of electricity that the plant needs. Okay? Decrease the cost of operation and maintenance, increase the design capacity, so by 2030 we're about 1 1/3, then just under 2 by 2045, and also being able to produce Class A biosolids 2030. So one of the things we did was we had ranking criteria for all these different observations. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see that we wanted to minimize cost, maximize safety. We wanted to minimize the disruptions during construction. Why? We got to keep the plant running. And we got to keep meeting permit even though construction is going on. Okay? We want to make sure that maximize use of existing facilities. This is a big one for me because even though you have a lot of things like valves and pumps that are beyond their life, concrete lasts a lot longer. You've got some big tanks out there that are made of concrete. They can be reused. So one of the things that the team really looked at was how can we use that existing infrastructure and not build it all new? Because you've made an investment in that, we might as well use that investment. Finally, reliability, and then maximizing current technology. Steve talked about the MBR. I'm just going to explain just a little bit more since we're going to be getting in and talking about an MBR. Okay, A normal treatment plant, you know, it's biological, you have bacteria. Regular plant depends on gravity. Goes into a big giant, you know, usually a clarifier. In your case, it stays in the same, you know, since it's a sequencing batch reactor, it's done in batches. You know, it settles, the bugs settle to the bottom. With a membrane, kind of think of it kind of like a coffee filter, okay? You know, the grounds stay on one side of the filter and the liquid goes through, okay? Well, the membrane's similar, except that the holes are very, very small. In fact, they're so small that the bacteria, let's say, pretend the bacteria is my fist, and the holes in the filter is this little circle. Bacteria don't go through, okay? So it's an effective barrier to bacteria. And what you get on the other end, you cannot tell from those pitchers of water. It's that clear, okay? It also reduces your disinfection needs because, again, the bacteria, they can't get through. You still have to have disinfection. You know, the Department of Ecology requires that, but it is an effective barrier. And some states now, places like Nevada and California, are actually looking at giving a credit to those plants that have membranes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the various alternatives. The top one was retrofitting the plant with a membrane bioreactor. It has the highest score, except for the last one, the lowest cost. And again, we're using the existing SBR tanks. Okay? We're making use of that asset. The second one is a brand new one. Okay? We're using the SBR tanks for equalization, not necessarily process. That's a little more expensive, not quite as high a score. In the last analysis, ballast and sludge, which was, you know, making it heavier so it would settle better, was the top alternative. Okay, but with the revised projections and the need for another SBR tank, that actually got more expensive. And with some of the difficulties that you have, score is not as high. And then just optimizing the facility, you know, while it's the least cost, it's also the least likely to succeed because you still have some of the same issues that you have today. Now, one of the things that the MBR does that away from your existing system is because we don't care about it settling, you can have more bacteria in there. Because one of the problems you have right now is there's kind of an edge between, you know, if they have too much bacteria, it doesn't settle well. But if they have too little bacteria, some of the right bacteria doesn't grow. That's why you're seeing those violations. You don't, because some of the bugs that take out the ammonia, they're the last to grow. So if you don't have a lot of bugs in there, you don't have a lot of the right bugs to take care of that ammonia. With MBR, that's not going to be a problem because we can grow a lot of bugs because again we have a barrier. You know, between what you have now and what you will have in the future, you will have anywhere from 3 to 5 times the amount of bacteria doing the work in that plant. Now I'm going to go through quickly. This is what it will look like. This is the first alternative. This is starting out. You have 3 SBR tanks, and we're adding a tank, a membrane bioreactor tank at the end, and then a mechanical building to house the pumps and the blowers and the other things for the plant. But how do we keep the plant online? I'm going to step through that. First off, we're going to get the MBR running, okay? Then we're going to operate SBR 2 and 3 at a higher, the MLSS is a fancy word for more bugs in the system, okay? Mixed liquors, suspended solids, okay? It just means more bugs. But because we're using MBR, we can operate the system at a higher level because we're not trying to settle it by gravity, okay? While that's operating in that mode, we're going to go into that first tank and do the necessary changes for the ultimate system. And once it's upgraded, it will be under operation. We'll do the second tank. And then finally, we'll have the 2 process tanks for the 2030 flow. And then third tank there can be interim equalization because you do have flows that vary. Yes, sir.
What's kind of the timetable on completing one tank?
Oh, one tank would probably take, we haven't done the design yet, but I would take a guess anywhere from 3 weeks to a month. Because they have to go in, they have to tear stuff out, they have to demolition. There's some walls that have to be built. So I would take a guess about a month.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go back like 2 slides? So what worries me is because you said our systems are really, they're aged, they're failing. What happens if an SBR goes down while we're retrofitting and now we're down to 1 SBR?
Well, you could even say that now. You need 3 to operate. So if you're out of 1, you're in trouble now.
Yeah, I know that. We still have 2 operating, but here we'd only have 1 operating in this scenario.
No, but because you're operating with more bacteria, you have more capacity.
If we had just 1 tank running, we'd be okay in that scenario?
You could probably get by with 1 tank for a short period of time, yes.
Yeah, that was a question.
No problem.
I guess just to add to that, the time of construction will matter as well.
Yes.
So this we will try to have this scheduled such that it would be summertime construction. The flows are a little lower, better weather, less infiltration in the system.
Yeah, because the temperature has a big impact on the process.
People are at their houses in the winter, right? Yeah.
And then for the 2045 flow, we would add another MBR tank here and then probably use that other part. So we really only need those 2 process tanks for the 2045 flow. You have enough volume in there because, and again, the reason we can do that is because we're, right now you're running the amount of bugs in there, use the number 2,000 milligrams per liter. That may not mean anything to you, but we're going to operate it somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000. So you can see, I mean, that's just a whole lot more bacteria in there doing the work for you. So we don't need excess volume. Okay. Now, this alternative, I already talked about the water. I was at a plant one time where we took a water bottle and we filled it up with effluent. And we were accused of taking that out of the water plant, not the wastewater plant, but it was really from the wastewater plant. It's very tough to tell. Now, sometimes during startup, it'll have a slight tint, but once it's up and running, you cannot tell it from tap water. So it's compatible with future upgrades for future regulations. Someday there may be other things that have to be added on. This type of plant is very modular and can be added on to in the future. And we could potentially produce drinking water quality out of this plant. There are plants in this, not necessarily in the United States yet, but in Singapore is probably the most famous, where they take wastewater, they go through a similar process like this, and they have process at the end. They go through ozone, ultraviolet light, reverse osmosis, put it back into the drinking water. In fact, it's so pure that the chip manufacturers that are in Singapore are buying all that water. Because chip manufacturers like Intel have to have ultra pure water. So the Singapore water is making such a high quality product. Chip manufacturers are buying all that water. So if you ever want to look up new water, Google new water and it'll talk about what they do there. Again, we're using existing concrete infrastructure. Again, an investment that we can continue to use. These will allow permit compliance because we're going to have more bugs. We're not going to have to worry about settling. We're going to be able to meet permit. And it also addresses future capacity demands that are you're going to be faced in the future. So, with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Steve, are you going to talk about next steps?
I guess I wanted to ask if there's questions first.
okay. Sure.
Yeah. I'm curious on the membrane. You made the comparison to a coffee filter, and any of us that drink coffee know that you can't use a coffee filter for very long before you're going to need to replace it. So that's my question is, first, how long does this membrane last before it needs to be replaced, and what is the replacement cost of these membranes?
There are different membrane materials. I have.
You have the sample, Doug?
I do have a sample. I have a ceramic membrane with me tonight. There's also different types of membranes. Pass it around.
Yeah, so I'll just take, could they explain this the other day, even though this looks solid, if you,
Yeah, if you put a drop of
Drop of
water
water
on
on
here,
here?
it'll disappear.
this goes right through and comes out through the middle. And then they put this under pressure. Bacteria stays on this side, the water goes through. Magic. Better than magic, because it's real.
One of the important things that will be done.
Over your phone, hold it over your
Might
phone.
make a mess.
He's doing it.
You broke it.
It's not instantaneous.
And then it's sitting and then blow through it.
Yeah, it takes pressure. You got to,
It does require a little bit of force.
No,
A little bit of pressure.
Yeah, it'll make its way through.
Just wait for it to go.
Wait for it, wait for it. I'd like to thank you for that visual on the coffee as well
Oh,
for
no
tomorrow
problem.
morning.
When I did the first Kubota membrane, it was for the Toledo tribes, and that's what the chairman of the tribe described it. He says, this is kind of like a giant coffee filter. I've never forgotten that, so. But this is one type of membrane.
So,
There are different types of membranes. One of the first things, if you go down this path, one of the first things that would have to be done is what's called a pre-selection process. Because there are different manufacturers and each one has a different material or different setup, they all have different patents on it. We would go through a pre-selection process, basically get bids from the manufacturers for their various types of membranes. So we can go into design knowing exactly what membrane we're going to use.
But Tracy's question was about the cost, the life expectancy, and the replacement cost.
A lot of the polymerics, we normally figure on a 10-year life. Now, I know some plants that they've replaced maybe a third years. So it varies. What's very important with especially the polymerics, because they're kind of like a fabric, is keeping sharp objects out of the basins. I visited a plant in the UK, and they dropped some screws to the plant. Those screws flew around and tore up plant. So keeping covers on those sections, good screening is very important. This one's a little tougher. This is actually a silicon carbide membrane. It's one of the hardest materials known. Car brakes, silicon carbide.
Just to enhance what Doug said, though, your system being a home system to begin with, right now, there's nothing that's going to get into the system via one of the residents because it would have to make its way through their septic tanks and then through their pump chamber, very small diameter pipe that's pushing liquid.
But even with the replacement, I just went through a operation and maintenance analysis for Sun River Resort near Bend. They're going from a typical activated sludge system to a membrane bioreactor. One thing, even though we have calculated in the O&M cost a 10-year replacement, it was still cheaper because of especially the labor savings, because in their case the clarifiers took so much labor, and these membranes, they're fairly automatic, so not a lot of labor. All the cleaning is automatic. The old days they used to have to take some of them out of the tank and They don't do any of that. Everything's cleaned in place. But we normally recommend a 10-year replacement cycle.
I might have missed it, but did you say how much it actually costs?
Well, it depends on the size. I mean, the membranes are not cheap. Because of manufacturing process that they go through, it is not a cheap process. Remember the membranes for
The
that
O&M cost in plan we did $10 million life cycle.
Okay, but that wasn't the cost. The membrane cost
It was just,
one around $2 million for membranes and equipment.
the capital cost?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but that's the membranes, blowers, pumps. The manufacturers usually package all that stuff together because they want all their equipment. That way they give you a better warranty if it's all their equipment.
I think the question was good. What I'd like to suggest is, since right now we're intending, I think, to come back and talk about finances, that we bring back the answer to your question
So we can be
the
specific.
next time we see you with specific.
On my memory. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Back on the options, you had 3A, 3B, 2A, 1. 3B was only 1 million more than 3A, and it was a whole new membrane. So what is only $1 million more? What's the extra? Like, what is that taking into place? I'm just curious about 3B because it's only $1 million more, and it was everything was new versus retrofitting our old system.
Brand new process tanks, and instead of using one of the existing SBRs for putting the membranes in, it would be a separate tank. So instead of a lot of the retrofit cost, we have a cost of new tanks. So
it's 2 trains built away from the existing 3 SBR basins. And the reason why we looked at that option was because the property next door to the plant was available. Thought that it would be, it could be cost effective to evaluate that. But as Doug mentioned, that the concrete that you've already invested in, such a large piece capital cost of a new plant, whether it's SBR or MBR, that concrete cost, it pushed it well beyond the cost of the retrofit option. We did believe that that option might be a little bit better from the standpoint of constructability. So when we ranked it, we scored it that way. The scoring reflects an ease in constructability because you'd be constructing basically a new plant next to the existing and we wouldn't have to worry about upsetting the process. But based on the ranking criteria that Doug explained, didn't score out as being higher. It was close, and as you pointed out, it was only $1 million more, but that cost doesn't include the cost of the property that you might have to acquire to put it on though either.
The property cost is down.
Property cost would be in addition to that.
Okay. But that would give, so for 22.5, we're retrofitting a system that's already in place. For 23 million, we'd build an entire new plant for process.
Large pieces of it, we would still we would be making the most of the existing piping and pump stations as best we could, but you'd be adding piping to connect to the basins as well.
we'd use those existing, in that scenario, we'd use the existing SBRs for equalization. So, because right now, stations on, right?
And yes,
I suppose the benefit to that one also would be that you could build it and then turn the switch on one day and you wouldn't have this lag time while you're trying to one SBR open.
it's the safest way to at least continue what you're doing already.
The corollary question to that is, if for the extra $1 million, does that buy us any further capacity, production value, long-term investment? No return on that investment necessarily.
If you find another beneficial use for the property that you acquire, there's a benefit.
So just in terms of, so the new membrane, the old facility be used in the meantime while you guys build the new one. couldn't the old facility at a later date in 10 years, we just go, hey, now we can retrofit that old facility with membrane technology and have even more capacity? Instead of having to buy the property at that point when property and prices go way up. Okay.
Yeah, that does make some sense, but
Right, Joe.
Can we go back to the costs, all the different projects? Looking at the last one, optimizing existing facility. What would, because I didn't really hear much about that. What would that entail? Just a brief.
that option is to basically continue to operate the way that you're operating, place all of the aging parts that have lost their reliability. However, it's, as it's mentioned, least likely to succeed. We think you would be continued to be challenged to meet permit requirements to do that. That it would pencil on paper, but because of the challenges that this facility has with EOD and with temperature, even though we would do our best to account for temperature, the existing basins, I think, would probably fail.
It wouldn't improve any additional capacity.
No, you wouldn't actually get additional capacity either.
Thank you.
Cody, can you say what you said again?
So the second part I said was that if we built the new membrane, they would be using the old one, the SBR, while the new one's built. Once that's finished, we'd switch it over, and then in 10, 15 years, if we need to, we can go back and change the SBR to membrane technology or retrofit or upgrade to accommodate for even more growth. The plant would already be there.
Or not wait and start immediately working on that to increase our capacity so we're not faced with a capacity issue down the street.
Because my thought process is if we upgrade the current one and say we have an explosion in growth, we're going to be looking at buying a new land and building a new system anyways in 10, 15 years at the rate we're going. I'm not saying that's for sure, I'm just saying that's a possibility. So it seems more logical for only $1 million more in this scenario. Obviously, we'll have to break down the prices and see what the numbers are. It seems more logical, and we're not making decisions here, but it seems more logical to build a new facility and have the backup there while we're building the facility in case anything goes wrong, and then also have the ability to upgrade it at a future time in 10 to 15 years for future generations when the city continues to grow.
Build a new facility on
Retrofit the old facility because the new facility is already built instead of having to purchase land in 15 years and build a facility when construction prices are $60 million. So
I think that makes sense, but we're taking a lot of the bones though out of that original plant though, aren't we? We'll still have to have a huge capital improvement.
Yeah, the one thing to keep in mind is with the new MBR, that's enough for 2030. With the MBR retrofit, you have enough tankage there, you don't have to build any more tankage for 2045.
So we can't use the SBR anymore once the MBR is built?
No. All I'm saying is, I mean, you could, but equalization is also very important. All I'm saying is that it's a little bit deceiving because for the 3A, we're just adding some more membranes, not doing any more tankage. For the second one, if you wanted it totally new, you're adding new tankage. So you have some future costs there that the first one doesn't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so but there'll be future costs anyways if we have to go even bigger or buy new property. That's what I'm saying. I'm looking at, I see where you're coming from. I'm looking at the 10 years, how much property will be, or 15 years, property will be, construction costs will be if we have to build a new facility in 15 years.
I just want to make sure it's clear that 3B is just size for 2030.
Yeah, that makes sense. But we do have the SBRs that we could modify or use in a crisis or a situation where we need it. And we won't have those in the 3A option. We have just the one facility.
Right, but that 3A, you have enough process tank for the 2045 capacity need.
I think what you're overlooking though is in 2045, there's gonna be 7 more people sitting here going, why back in 2020 didn't they just make the move and prepare us for this so we weren't faced with this, and now that piece of property next to it has a water park sitting on it, so it's not an option to go that
We
route.
could use that as a water park, I suppose.
Well, if we're talking about the quality of water we're producing, I think you're right.
Well, Council, I want you to think about something else too. The 2045 capacity that they're talking about is based in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the numbers that they're using have to go with Growth Management Act. What they have dictated out will be our growth. Our UGA is set, even with our building out completely within our UGA. The water rights that we may get, that we hope to be getting here shortly, will give us the water inside of that equation that will take us out to 2045. And thereafter, there is no more capacity to be handled by this wastewater treatment facility unless we want to contract with Rainier or somebody else to have their stuff pumped in. So you don't need a whole lot more capacity than what that system is going to design to provide for you, even at 2045 and beyond.
Steve just pointed out, and it's worth sharing as well, and that's that there's plenty of capacity in terms of space in the existing facility also to go larger if that's really what you wanted to do, in thinking the same way and not having to acquire property. I mean, that's something that could be looked at. It does, I think, make for potential of modular expansion a little bit better, because right now, as you asked Councilman Colt the question about the size of the MBR and the fact that we need to push all of the flow through one train, we have to size that adequately to do so. If we built everything offline from the existing 3 basins, we could size 2 trains to be a little bit smaller and expandable, side of the same footprint as concrete that is big enough to contain 2045 flows. So that is, I think you're onto something that is could be worth looking at.
They were both, I mean, you guys have both high ranked. One was obviously a little bit higher, but I mean, it's only 4-point difference from your ranking. So I mean, you guys, when you looked at it, you thought this could be a good idea also.
So essentially to do what I'm talking about, that 23.5 would go up in order to make a basin that was equally sized. I don't remember what those numbers were, but it's probably a couple $1 million more in order to have that true comparison of 2045 capacity. And then we would downsize the number of MBR cassettes that you would put in that until you could expand those as you grew and needed them.
So you're saying we're okay on our property for everything to 2045, or so, as to Cody's point, are we being short-sighted if we don't take advantage of some kind of property that we might need even beyond that point?
We are definitely, we need to provide you a 2045 option. So that is what this will do. The way that Doug was explaining it was part of continuing to expand, but we would make it expandable.
Yeah, I have one more question. So I worked in the Navy, and I've worked on reverse osmosis, and the one thing that always happened was our pumps would go down and we would lose pressure, and those units cannot work in low pressure at all. Is that, and that was back in 2004, is that still an issue with pressure and with these membrane units?
Well, yeah. The membranes are nanofilters.
Yeah.
RO is filtration at the molecular level. So the pumps and the pressure needed through RO is a totally different world than these. Like I mentioned the Kubota membrane. Only about 5 feet of water elevation, 2.5 to 5, is needed to drive through that membrane. So it's not that much. In fact, the Tulalip plant, it was first designed totally be by gravity, no pumps. And but Kubota is kind of an interest because they have a slightly larger pore size. Some of the driving head is, but most of them have pumps that are not maybe 30 PSI type pumps. They're not high head pumps at all, like you would have to have an RO.
Have y'all made retrofits similar to what you're proposing here in Yelm with other cities?
Oh, yeah, I mean, the project I'm working on currently down in Sun River is their plant with membranes.
From similar to what we have currently?
Well, it's not a sequence impact reactor, but it is an activated sludge plant, and they're having similar issues meeting their nitrogen on their, they're actually a Class B reclaimed water, and the state has said, no, you're putting it out on the golf course, you need to be Class A. They feel that because of the quality that they get out the membrane, that they want to retrofit.
Is it public knowledge what the cost is, the project cost for some of those you've worked with?
I didn't attend the public meeting, but the public has been notified of the costs, yes.
Could you share some, I mean, is it in the ballpark of what we're paying, or is it more or cheaper?
It's in the same ballpark. It's a little smaller size, so the numbers are.
We actually
smaller.
used the quotes that we got from that project, build some of these numbers.
Yeah, because I had quotes from membrane manufacturers, so we were able to use those.
Most of these projects, I'm guessing, are in the $15 to $30 million range.
Sometimes smaller. It depends on the size. And it depends on what other peripheral items have to be done. I mean, in this case here, there's also a number of other items that are being addressed.
Yeah, I mean, the electrical system is part of that, upgrading the electrical system and the issues I was talking about with variable frequency drives and pump stations that need to be upgraded. Right now, for instance, the intermediate pump station doesn't have the capacity to help staff to dewater the of the flows being throttled to the point where they can manage it, as the elevation of the pump station is much lower than the water elevation in the tanks. So if they just open the valves, flow into this pump station to help them to move the water out, will flood. So an improvement would be to actually build this with a rim elevation that matched the top of the tanks, close to the tank, so it would be part of that structure and part of the wall of SBR.
But to answer your question, the Sun River project is about 1 million gallons a day. Here you're looking at what, 1.26,
1.8.
1.8. Well, no, that's future.
2040, yeah.
2030. We're looking at alternatives ranging right now, contractors on board and costing out anywhere between 12 and 18. But at the 12 million, they're not getting like a new dewatering device. They're not getting a new generator. And on the 18 million, they're getting a lot of, they're getting all the bells and whistles. So
That's fair.
that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve or Pat, are there other costs that you see associated with this? This is focused solely on the rebuilding of that plant. There's pipes leading into the plant. There's all of our step tank booster pumps and so forth. Currently, are the rates able to keep up with the maintenance and expected repair of those parts of the system as well?
Well, they are currently, because we're not adding anything new right now to it. Right. The system isn't a closed system, and it has not really required a lot of maintenance in recent years. We can anticipate that to happen, especially if we start adding some. But the operating part of the budget, to take care of that. On the capital side of the budget, that's where we're dealing with the upgrades to the plant. I'd like to dedicate the next meeting talking about our options, capital side. But the existing system kept going with our existing operating budget. There's not a lot we have been doing and a lot right now needs to be done. What's going to require additional costs is if we do expand neighborhoods, a lot of that would be developer driven, constructed by the developer. We're also looking at what happens if we were to build, say, farther to the southwest, where we've got some higher elevation ground. Do we need a pump system there? Could we use a gravity system at least part of the way to get it from that area to our existing system, or gravity all the way to the plant? One of the challenges with that is that you have a different kind of effluent going by gravity because you're bringing solids, a whole different product to the plant to treat. Right now, we're just treating, as Brian was saying, we're just treating the effluent from the step pump.
However, part of the cost of the screening that would need to be done in order to accommodate solids that Pat is talking about are incorporated. Part of it.
We just have to
Just in
anticipate
case.
that type of growth is going to happen.
Can I ask Glenn what he thinks the best option is? He's been quiet.
Silent partner.
I'm sorry, could you ask your question again?
Yeah, which project do you think's best for us?
That's a good question. So my team and my group has to make this work. So we write the software, the code, we did all the control system upgrades on the existing system. And it doesn't really, I don't have a preference. We do this all the time, not necessarily with MBRs to SBRs, but we do upgrades all the time. We go in, you know, I can show you photos that would be awake at night, you know, wires hanging out everywhere, and I'm sleeping in the parking lot to make sure it's going to work right. From a clean standpoint, you know, the green, what we call greenfield in-house, brand new MBR next door is by far probably the safest from not upsetting the current process, but it's expensive. And we just did a lot of work at the treatment plant replacing the control system. Now, it can all be reused, whether we use it on the water system that exists or on the pump stations we need to update. You know, it's all reusable. We don't do anything one-off black boxes. There will be some challenges. There is no doubt about it. You know, going half SBR, half MBR, that will be a critical planning, get everybody on the same page, you know, Bill's team, you know, it's going to have to be taken care of. And, you know, it's in my world, it's all about the data. You know, what happened overnight when nobody was here, you know, every day, doing tests, doing, you know, lab reports, keeping it under control. For those of you who don't know, we have a gentleman in our office, his name's Scott. He is a licensed for wastewater guy. He goes down the road to Nisqually and helps them all the time. You know.
Actually, he is the operator for Nisqually. So Scott worked with Doug to help to come up with the phasing strategy that we have presented tonight.
Do we have the staff technicality to do it? Do they have the knowledge? And
You know, Bill and Jeremy are great guys. They're fun to work with. You know, they've called me at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's not working. You know, that's where, you know, in my world, I really do enjoy. We get to know the guys. You know, we're just a resource for them. You know, I'd rather them call me at 2 a.m. with a question than 8 a.m. with a disaster. I mean, that's why we're here.
more so requirements. Are there any requirements for like this new membrane technology that we don't have currently?
No. Both Bill and Jeremy worked in previous lives with membranes over in Mason County. You know, they've seen it, and I guess one thing that's maybe not obvious from what Doug and Brian were saying, membranes are a constant process. They are always cleaning water. There's only a very short period of time when they're doing what they call a diffuser clean, that they're not permeating water, not passing clean water through the membrane. So it won't be a batch process like you had today, where you know you make this batch of this tank, then you go to the next one, and if the tank fills up too fast, it has to shorten the cycle and then hop to the next tank. Membranes don't do that. They're just constantly cleaning, doing their job.
Would you say it's even less labor intensive than it is now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Probably the biggest concern that I have is that because they are so seamless, many of the clients we work with sometimes just forget about them and things don't get maintained and taken care of, and then they fall apart faster. So there's frustration that there's an investment that hasn't been taken care of. But because Bill and Jeremy have worked at facilities that use the technology, I believe they understand that.
Thank you.
Also a lot less process control that has to be worried about. 'Cause in a plant like you have now, you're worrying again, it has to settle by gravity. So you're constantly, how's it settling? They're doing what's called an SVI. It's a test to see how it settles. You don't worry about it in this. So all that goes away. You have to many times worry about what kind of bacteria you have. You've got filamentous bacteria. You have a few filamentous bacteria, it may cause a little foam. It's not going to upset your process. So there's less worrying about biomass with a membrane than our process, because again, you're not depending on gravity. So two different worlds. But I agree with what Brian was saying. It cannot be ignored. I did a plant in Barrow, Alaska. They ignored an alarm at night. Next morning they showed up and the tanks had overflowed. And being in Barrow, it was inside of a building, 40 below outside. And they had ignored it, and there was basically activated sludge all through their building and in their lab and in their office. It was not a good sight.
Open the door, let it freeze up.
Perfect.
Well, at least it's a lot easier to work with.
I had one last technical question, maybe. Cody, you had
I have a question too. You can go ahead first.
guy.
Yeah.
The timeline had us making Class A biosolids by 2030. Why so long? Why, and what's the process? Why would we have to do that? Because there's a great cost savings to us eventually of creating our own biosolids and being able to land apply or whatever, or incinerate, rather than trucking them to another facility.
Honestly, that was a remnant from the previous plan. That was the way that the financial plan had it laid out. Quite honestly, with where we are right now and the conversation with our financial consultant and the next conversation that we want to have with you on the 3rd, we could look at what that might do. It was always part of the strategy that was discussed from a financial standpoint 4 years ago. So
And then an important part of the discussion on the 3rd then, because of the potential cost increases to shipping sludge and stuff out.
right, and so that process, if you remember, also we went through the same kind of process to make a decision about what the best solution to solids handling was. Choices there as well. Yeah, Ording is in the process of actually modifying theirs, and Glenn is working on a project for the city of Edmond as well. More than just in about that last week, but it's a different conversation, and we can have that conversation. We'd love to have that conversation. It's an additional cost.
Literally my question. So, I'll just tag on to what Mayor said. I know that there's places where they convert their solids and people can come use it like as fertilizer, and they sell pieces of it or sell it. Is that something that, and I know you're talking about that we could possibly do with?
Here comes the biochar.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an option.
Okay. Ship it.
It's coming off of a process called a bio-dryer, which is kind of a combination between a dryer and composting. It kind of takes the low-tech of composting and the energy needed for
Smell it.
drying.
Yeah, you can open it. I was going to taste it.
Seriously, no, it doesn't smell.
The mayor opened it last week. Opened it.
I wouldn't put it in my coffee, but it's.
I just want to remind you, those aren't Tic Tacs.
Chocolate.
But no, I mean, I'm working with the city of Ording right now, and they're going to use this bio dryer. That's the product or
Oh, yeah, it's good stuff. High quality.
Is there a plan to sell it also, or just to give it free to citizens?
No, I think it's poodle.
Maybe both.
Okay.
I mean, they'd love to just give it away to their citizens, but there's also a lot of nurseries and other places out there that would love to have an amenity that they don't have to pay astronomical prices for.
Like pyrolite and mixed soil mixes and stuff like that.
We have a couple of greenhouses around here.
Yeah.
Make some money.
Anyway, that's.
Probably about as ostriches.
Well, I'd like to wrap up real quick. From the timeline standpoint, we're kind of calling this meeting tonight a part one, if you will, the technical part of it. Part two, we'll label it, will be on the third. We'd like to talk about some options for how to fix this. And so what I'm calling our third part would follow the proposal from our design the plant. So we'd be bringing that to you in the form of we've got a lot to do in less than a month. So I invite you to stick around and, if you've got some technical questions on the plant, that's what tonight's all about. That. And we're good. We start the design. So that's our part one of the discussion. Hang on to that because, like I said, there's a lot to happen in the next month. So.
I have one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. Just related to cost, since obviously that's an important factor to this, right? Big investment. One of the things that I want to look at before the next meeting is we've been looking at different options from the standpoint of lenders who offer loan and grant programs. And I think it's worth noting that the size of Yelm right now is really important. You're just under 10,000. Cross this threshold, and I don't know whether this will happen in the next census or not. All of you have a better idea as to that. But in the 2020 census, if Yelm crosses the threshold from 9,000 and change to over 10,000, it might change your funding ability as well. We're in a really sweet spot right now to take advantage of grants. That becomes a little bit less possibility. You're a community that's greater than 10,000.
We have to do something quick.
Well, so timing on that is not, there's a little bit of time. We did look this up today, that the 2020 census is supposed to be published in March of 2021. So we would need to have the applications in place based on the current population and approvals all prior to that. But just worth saying.
Good point.
Sorry, Pat.
No, that was it.
All right. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for the presentation. I think we all learned a lot, and we're ready to have a continued conversation on the 3rd. So we'll close the meeting down, but if you want to stick around and talk to the pros about stuff, please do. I don't know what kind of staff support we have tonight to lock the doors up, but maybe we can get them locked and people, last person out. And maybe Dylan will be here, but we just want to make sure everything's locked up. See you on the 3rd.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
I'd be curious on too. Yeah, thank you.
Take my showing.
Yeah, make sure you grab that.
I'm with you, Code.
I mean, for $1 million more, does it make sense?
No, it makes sense. The whole thing is the budget. I mean, how are we gonna afford to pay for it? Yeah.
I think.
Honestly, I mean, I think, yeah, that's the right move.
I think it'd be super surprising.